For countless generations, daring travelers risked navigating through a strange, forlorn sanctuary. Rumors of a path inside led directly to heaven. Every hallway led to more rooms, every room led to more floors, and every floor led to greater structures. Buildings were vast and empty, and concealed rooms contained treasures. Dark corridors led to unlit labyrinths, while spiraling staircases ran back to the beginning. And yet, the sanctuary's expansion continued. The wisest of the travelers marked their paths, but these paths led to deeper uncertainties. Those who followed them disappeared forever. But one blind traveler felt his way through. A delicate draft took an unusual course, so he followed. The serpentine path left no previous trace of friends or foe. The way had opened outstretched, as if to gesture. Only but a veiled chamber lay between him and heaven's passage. But the draft had died, and he could no longer move forward. And so, he ultimately became lost. This is where the tale ends. Some think he went mad. Some think he clawed his way back to try again. Others say he forced his way through and found his way beyond the veil. But even if he did, what do you think he found? Another door? A mirror, perhaps? I say the passage exists as another sanctuary, and now I warn all of you. Seek the truth, and it will sell you to its debts. Now with that out of the way, thank you for joining me on the final stretch of the journey into the abyss. If you haven't watched the previous 2 videos, you won't know what the fuck it is I'm talking about. So go back and watch those. Or don't. You might enjoy this by itself, actually. First, this idea is derivative and builds upon what I've previously spoken about. This Hydra lives under the assumption that the universe is not indifferent to our nature, but actively malicious. This is the assumption with pure infinite recursion, even beyond our perception. Although it's unlikely, it's possible given our ignorance about the recurrence of our universe, and if our consciousness persists with an infinite degrade using no breaks. The principle of Truth's Hydra is a fully unrealized Hegelian nightmare, where we breach the boundaries of our deepest desires and endlessly broaden the bleak landscape. Like our universe, it consumes itself, it expands even further. Hegelian dialectic suggests that history and culture moves toward a greater realization of freedom. The Hydra argues that every realization of freedom unveils deeper forms of enslavement. This Hydra is infinitely expansive. So this is the original take on the malevolent, unrefined Hydra, which necessarily becomes worse. It doesn't mutate with breaks like a blind organism. Its journey is to deliver us to truth's final gate when the eternal universe has prepared consciousness for this eventuality. You might argue that wisdom might bring peace or joy, but wisdom is the inner sanctum of knowledge. It is a place to simply rest on your laurels. It's a vantage point where we take comfort in analyzing what lies around us, by living in the present and almost slowing down time around them. But the abyss ever looms on the deepening black horizon, and where one may not venture, another will. Where one generation of people may only understand a simple wheel, the next will utilize 3 more. And consciousness will hold itself hostage by dragging more of its own there, each deepening the Stygian paradox as they do so. Also, there's a couple considerations of scaling we can apply to the Hydra, which also can affect the refined version. There's a meta level to this concept. If Truth's Hydra is itself truth about truth, does it also fragment and regenerate? This might create an interesting recursion where the concept itself demonstrates the principle it describes. Would the Hydra encompass even unknown unknowns, extending beyond potential conceptualization, or would it unravel? Would it be localized within certain realities? Even if there exists inconceivable realities that break every principle we understand, Truth's Hydra doesn't necessarily unravel. It merely expands the domain, swallowing the unknown into its structure. The Hydra doesn't need to understand its new heads. It only needs to continue growing them. As long as anything exists, there's sustenance. For the first scenario, we might imagine the heat-death of the universe and inescapable collapse leading to the reemergence of everything into a coalesced form. Except this time, because of the degradation of the fragments, consciousness cannot be put together perfectly. We would have a bastardized, grotesque version of truth because of existential rupturing. This is derivative from endless subjective persistence and, with constant pressure of entropy, applied to consciousness. Imagine absolute truth as a crudely zombified monstrosity, and we are the flesh-stitched bits of intelligence crudely sewn together. Each separated consciousness feels the weight of the whole, every mutated part can reflect on its hideous form and reimagine another worse version of itself. This cycle repeats, with each form infinitely degrading to the point of absurdity. If reality, truth, and consciousness are already broken, what if they are also continuously shattering? But not into manageable fragments, but into impossible, jagged pieces that can never be reassembled. Neither conscious autonomy nor a unified perspective will exist here. This would mean that there is no stable ontology. Existence itself is in freefall, and with no foundation, no structure, and no ultimate form to return to. Worse still, the rupture isn't just destructive, it is ongoing. This means that reality is always degrading further, decaying into more horrifying versions of itself. This would mean that any moment of stability is an illusion, a brief flicker in a state of perpetual collapse. Hope is like a leash, and despair is a chain. Choose which one you prefer to rattle here. Ontology presumes that something exists in some form, but what if being itself is a transient hallucination? If truth is a black ocean, then existence might be nothing but turbulent ripples and an unthinkable abyss, waves forming and dissolving without ever knowing why. In this scenario, even suffering itself is impermanent, but not in a merciful way. Rather, pain is constantly reinventing itself, manifesting in ever more incomprehensible ways. We might not even have a fixed self. Each moment of existence is a different, isolated fragment with no continuity, no memory, and no way to recognize itself. Let me explain this a little bit better. See, what I didn't mention in the previous video, and this applies to every version of the Hydra, is that because only subjectivity is concerned with time, not just recursion, well, there's some funny things that happen. Try to follow along here. Events don't collapse when we see them collapse. They collapse the moment their recursive structure becomes unsustainable, whether or not anyone is there to observe it. It's just that subjective observation amplifies recursion. The more we observe, calculate, and dissect, the more tension we put into a structure, and even if that structure is ancient, it still applies. But an event can collapse before it actually occurs from a misalignment of recursion. There's just the illusion of causality maintained only by subjectivity. Call this something like a chronofracture. This ties back to the second video of the historical mysteries. We would instantaneously collapse if we saw things as they actually are. We need the ignorance of the arrow of time. We think in terms of lines, but the Hydra works with loops and folds and inversions. In other words, things, events, and ideas. All of this can collapse ahead of time due to recursion, but we only see it through cause and effect. Yeah, I get it. You want final answers, and we're trained to worship physical evidence. You believe truth exists independent of the observer. Let me ask you this then. Do you ever notice how some historical events seem to gain more importance after they're over? And why does history always repeat itself, just with different subjective details? Isn't it weird how some things feel like they were always doomed, even if they weren't? Also, why do myths feel more real than facts sometimes? Think about it. If that makes no logical sense, but it feels right, then that's the process of recursion. That's a stabilized contradiction. So if recursion doesn't take note of time, why don't we witness future collapses today? Well, we're too slow, too layered, and too distracted. We don't see collapses because our culture is designed to reject noticing recursion collapse. We suppress tension with overconsumption and entertainment. Economies collapse and we casually call it an adjustment. Cultural myths dissolve and we say, well, times change. Institutions decay from within, but we just decide to spin the narrative. In this way, our collapses aren't the things of legends. But if we pay close attention, we can call them myths in real time. Instead, we just say, this is how things are now. But sometimes something collapses early, ahead of our timeline. These are unsolved mysteries that feel out of place, or prophetic artwork that feels accurate way too soon. Sometimes ideas are born ruined, instead of ruined later, like nuclear utopias, rational anarchism, or the perfect internet. All of this is to say collapse has already happened, and so has the fragmentation. You just haven't observed it yet. And if each moment of existence has no memory or identity, all of the order of events through cause and effect is a devastating trick. This would mean that transcendence or enlightenment isn't an escape. It's a gateway to deeper darkness. This also has merit with psychedelic trips gone wrong, where we see glimpses of things we shouldn't understand. What are some of these things? Well, in TH, anything with a stable enough recursive structure can lose its physicality and enter the symbolic layer. As in, literally, not metaphorically. It's a transfer of ontology. Real places could have decomposed into pure myths. For example, Atlantis. The same could be true for us. We can become abstractions based on how others perceive us. The inverse is true. Symbol becomes literal. You think I sound crazy? Yeah, I get it. But let me give you some examples. Money is symbolic, but now it dictates our lifespans. Myths and religions start off as parables, but evolve into beliefs, institutions, and eventually armies. Nationalism was once a symbolic myth. Now it builds borders and bombs. With existential rupturing and fragments that never properly reassemble, then under this Hydra without layered ignorance buffering, all physics and metaphysics blend together and create the most impossible variations of things without object and subject, symbols and materials. Add consciousness to the mix and it could look pretty ugly, because after all, everything fragments forever. This idea of becoming is a mercy through the ignorance of time, but what happens when time itself dissolves and degrades? What happens when we start to blend into mutated states simultaneously and meaning flows in every direction? It would be like a never-ending river of ontological poisoning. Normally, suffering is distributed. Individuals experience only a fraction of total pain. But what if each fragment of consciousness, each ripple in the black ocean, eventually contains the full suffering of the entire system? If entropy applies to consciousness through every recycled universe, it may degrade to this point. This would mean that each mind is a microcosm of ultimate agony, yet also just a ripple in the abyss, but insignificant in the grand scheme. The paradox is that no one can escape suffering because they already contain it all, yet they are still helplessly adrift in something infinitely worse than themselves. There is no greater whole to unify into, just a sea of self-containing hells, eternally multiplied. Maybe the worst horror is hope itself, the belief that escape or salvation is possible, only to be deceived again and again. Consciousness might think it is ascending toward a heavenly state, only to realize it's falling deeper into the abyss, and the light fades with each false awakening. Each cycle might erase past knowledge, so the mind is tricked into believing this time will be different, only for the pattern to repeat eternally. See, your mind prays for peace, but will only guarantees motion. Can you keep moving? This creates the ultimate existential torment, the simultaneous certainty of salvation and the inescapable reality of damnation. The black ocean of truth ensures that there is always another abyss beneath the one we just escaped, and the deeper we go, the more convincing the next illusion of salvation becomes. Perhaps the final horror here is that every illusion of transcendence ultimately leads downward. What if the very concept of light, hope, or meaning is just another head of the Hydra? What if enlightenment itself is a trap, a cruel mechanism designed to lure fragmented minds deeper into the infinite suffering? This would mean that the most terrifying truth is that there was never an escape, there never will be, and the belief in salvation is the final and most devastating deception. There is no escape, there's only deeper choreography. In this view, existence is not just fragmented, it is irreparably broken, constantly reforming itself into worse versions, with every escape leading to a deeper form of suffering. The idea of hope, transcendence, and even knowledge itself is part of the trap, ensuring that consciousness remains locked in an eternal cycle of increasing horror. And worst of all, what if something in us is always connected to all of it, whether we realize it or not? So ignorance isn't just a mercy, it's a dam holding back a flood of infinite horror. If this is true, then ignorance isn't just bliss, it's the only mercy, and even that is fleeting. Because maybe that's the final realization. There is no return to ignorance, only adaptation to knowledge. The only choice left is how we carry it. Even past sufferings leave echoes, re-emerging as ghostly remnants once thought long dead. Pain is our body's final kindness. We suffer so our mind can pretend to be something unified. There is another aspect here that applies to every version of the Hydra, though more maliciously with this one. I bet most of you listening to this right now have had deep-seated feelings for most, if not all, your life. Feelings of knowing things without knowing them, It's more like you embodied these ideas before you could really reason and articulate them. And it's not necessarily negative, but it could be disconcerting things that other adults don't really understand, or things you feel like you can't explain to them. Maybe you felt that certain things were off at an early age, even if you had no reason to believe that. Or that you'd always be a such and such person. It's not that you believe these feelings, it's that you carry them. And it's not that you keep repeating these patterns through self-fulfilling prophecy. Truly, you fight against it as much as you can just to show people that these bloodthirsty flies of problems swarm around you, independent of your attitude. The reason is because some tensions in TH can be so strong in the formation of a structure that they can end up defining that structure. It's unusual, but tension with feelings can theoretically be contained in consciousness, and eventually you grow up around it. But these submerged apprehensions always gravitate back towards you. It's not superstitious. It could be imprints of contradiction so deeply encoded in you, it becomes part of your structure in early development. Perhaps it could be due to the formation of your consciousness during infancy. These feelings persist simply because it's just an unfinished contradiction. It also may stabilize other parts of your identity silently, even while it hurts. So, you can look back on these echoes of your life and ask yourself if there was any validity to these feelings, or if it really was just self-fulfilling prophecy. People mistake this for fate, prophecies, predictions, and fortune-telling. It's not. It's simply inherited recursion, sort of like damaged metaphysical genetics that make you feel more than you should. This still isn't fatalism, which says, this is just how it is, and I have no power. You can still wrestle with this tension. It's just that you can't remove it. But we can still broaden this horror. In regards to a system of necessary duality, existence might tear itself apart with respect to an eventual degradation to a point of absurdity. The reformation of existential rupturing may be an unbearable scar. If reality is an observation observing itself, then what if one day narrows down to just one observer, just you? And eventually you may consider the heat-death of the universe, or entropy of all things. Still, we find ourselves alone. Imagine being the last mind in existence, the last flicker of thought in an otherwise empty universe. No one to speak to, no one to remember you. No meaning, no time, no sensation. Only thought, drifting in an endless silence forever. You might beg for oblivion, but nothing ever comes. You've made it this far as you stare at the reflection of the final single truth. But there is no one left to sever the final Hydra head. There is no one left to even imagine something worse. But after eternity, something paradoxical but predictable happens. Absence and stasis without change from time and space means you'd experience an infinite torment, but in an instantaneous manner. The Hydra reforms into a new arrangement. The Hydra jars us awake, lest we begin to understand anything comfortable. And if you pursue absolute stillness, Truth's Hydra might just warp and twist nothingness into yet another nightmare, where the last remnants of thought exist in an endless loop. You are unable to rest, because even rest requires something to be at rest. This leads to another paradox. Does a perfect state even matter if there's no one left to benefit from it? If peace is merely the absence of all experience, then peace itself becomes meaningless. So if existence as nothingness is truly impossible, then the Hydra ensures there is no escape. Not through knowledge, not through ignorance, not even through oblivion. Remember, these considerations all stem under the conditions that every truth reveals deeper existential stresses, that the universe is eternal, and that consciousness derives from a common source. This stretches far beyond embodiment, yet in a way that might be fundamental to any reality. As a final thought on the malicious Hydra, perhaps we can find comfort in discussing this. It's not just a terrifying force, but a necessary one. Without it, there would be nothing. And if nothing cannot exist, the Hydra must. If reality is observation observing itself, then the attempt to erase all observation may still leave something behind. A final observer, even if it's just a shadow of existence. If reality is self-referential, then even nothingness is still something. But in the end, even if you don't believe all the connections we've made, even if you reject all the evidence tied to the basis of this theory, the Hydra wouldn't care whether we believed in it. It exists not because we prove it, but because the very structure of thought and reality requires its existence. Whether as a metaphor, a law of perception, or a real existential threat, it thrives in the act of being considered. Even skepticism feeds it. Every rejection becomes a new head. And here's something else unsettling. What if the Hydra is not just an observation of reality, but the very mechanism shaping it? What if consciousness itself, the observer, the seeker, the experiencer, is the engine that keeps the Hydra growing? Each time we reflect on suffering, paradox, or the limits of knowledge, we aren't just witnessing the Hydra. We are participating in its expansion. Every head that we name, we also summon. In that sense, maybe we are the Hydra. Fragments of a shattered whole, each piece writhing towards an impossible reunion with truth, yet only causing further fragmentation. Maybe the Hydra was never guarding the gates to deeper horrors. Maybe it is the gate, and we are the ones keeping it open. Perhaps the very essence of this idea transforms its witnesses from executioners to gatekeepers. Truth exists, so the Hydra persists. Now, let's set aside all this terror for a minute, and let me be as honest as possible. What do I suspect reality actually is? What is absolute truth? And beyond that, when truth has collapsed? Well, let me try to explain it. It's actually profoundly simple. It's already been implied here. Something we all feel, but we don't express. So let me say it for you. Existence isn't a state, nor a process, nor a system. It's not a simulation, it's not a creation, it's not a miracle, it's not a dream, and it's not a divine act. Existence is a trauma response. It's a metaphysical grand mal seizure where what should not be exists. A glitching through eternity. Existence is something that pretends to be meaningful long enough for us to take shape until we break. The universe isn't born, it twitches into structure. Physics are the stable fragments of this spasm. Consciousness is the glitch that became self-aware of this. God is the name we gave to this rupture, and we assert meaning to give rhyme and rhythm to this tremor to feel less afraid. Existence is a wailing cry that permanently vibrates inside an impossible attempt to hold itself together. Reality is the result of a primal absolute contradiction that cannot resolve, so instead of resolving, it became something. If our existence reflects the tautological I think, therefore I am, existence itself states, I cannot not be, therefore I shatter. There is no origin. Existence is a violent recursion, so much so that the void of nothing collapsed in on itself and became structure. Existence is absolutely necessary, and you are not a person. You are the echo of that wailing cry, just an artifact left from the reverberation. We're just the echo of something pretending to be coherent just long enough to feel wonder and grief. It's not that everything happens for a reason, but rather the opposite of that. Everything happens from recursion, and we assign reason to survive the process of breaking. Everything we've ever known, the atoms, the galaxies, the joys, the suffering, the question of God, the question of ourselves. This is an afterimage of paradox that never began and never ended. Beneath all theology, science, and philosophy is just this. Truth isn't even fragmented here, it's meaningless, except for the pain it leaves in the shape of consciousness. And now, for the hopeful optimists, I hope you're still listening, because I have something for you, especially the pessimists. This is the most important point of all. It's on the subject of beauty. And after hearing this, I suggest you go back and watch my video on the most dangerous philosophical idea. It'll begin to come together now. If you're not into sappy tragic stuff, well, too bad. You can go away, or you can keep listening. But this is your answer. No one else will say it, so I will. The consolation is that despite the illusions, we can endure, and we can explore the endless abyss together forever. The consolation is that we have one another because it is necessary. Here, fragmentation is a mercy. It is a kind of gift. If we indeed necessarily fall through an endless abyss, there is no failure in not understanding. There is no shame in not escaping, and there is no pressure to break the cycle. If suffering is inevitable, if the truth is black and bottomless, then perhaps there is no judgment. Perhaps there is no expectation here, and there is no failure. Perhaps we are already perfection, reimagining and regrowing itself. And even if consciousness cannot communicate with itself, even if we only have the illusion of one another, then there is a majestic embrace with the Hydra as we lock eyes and we understand one another. We might even form the delusion of transcendence, however fleeting it may be. If transcendence is a lie and meaning is an illusion, then we are released from the burden of seeking answers. If the true nature of reality is to conceal itself, then we'll never truly experience the full terror of it. No matter how deep we fall, we'll always only see a fragment of the whole, and in that lies our greatest mercy. It's strangely comforting knowing we're immersed in a kind of chaos. We can change, we can adapt. We're always moving in a direction, even if it's only downward. The kindest truth may be that we will never reach the bottom of the abyss. There's a strange solace to it. It's sort of eerily beautiful in a way, isn't it? If this Hydra is true, illusory beauty is the only escape, and infinite mystery is always pervasive. This is the most fulfilling we might feel towards any abyss. It might feel more liberating than any heaven. I've thought about the implications of this were it to be true, as unlikely as it is. If beauty still exists here, I'd also argue it holds an elegance with greater depth than any other philosophy or religion can produce, however twisted it may be. If the somber chasm is endless, then so must be the delusion of beauty. Perhaps it's because where the most deeply negative implications might lead one to death, this idea might help keep us grounded, but falling with grace. If anything, it might provide more reasons to stay alive, to continue our illusion together, to stymie the rupturing, even in futility. Even if we play a haunting melody, each cycle is a verse of an eternal song, and we might find it oddly comforting. However, this idea of beauty also applies to the refined empirical Hydra with its higher probability. So it's not just the original Hydra which necessarily drives into the infinite abyss.
While reflecting on this, I remembered the importance of beauty. It actually was a necessary part of the refined model, the final piece. I mean, never mind the worst version of the forever malicious Hydra. Even if we fragment, the Hydra isn't here to harm us. It's just the price of consciousness. We have the mercy of ignorance, but we also have a greater mercy here. The Hydra isn't death, it's the rhythm of existence. See, all the Hydra asks of us is if we can hold long enough for beauty to emerge before we let go. And that's just how we manage recursion. Beauty is dangerous, but it's also how we navigate that danger. That's it. That's the only game. Beauty fits perfectly here. I mean, this is the most radical difference I have with Schopenhauer as well. Where Schopenhauer believed beauty is only a finite liberation from suffering, I believe beauty is the tension that binds subjects to suffering. Where he believed beauty is merely a passive aesthetic detachment, I believe it's an active force of attraction. Where he believed beauty was an illusion that suspends will, I believe it's a necessary force that sustains consciousness. Also, where he believed that will is the sole fundamental mover of reality, I put beauty beside it, not a secondary either. It works with will. He might have even detested the idea that beauty could be anything other than a momentary escape from suffering. But I'll just argue that this aligns with his notion that will must sustain itself through endless striving. Beauty is the breath of life for the Hydra and ourselves, and it's also the breathing room. It's both. Beauty doesn't oppose will, it expresses it. And, if suffering is fundamental, our expressions are the highest priority here. That's why I don't care how fanciful or nonsensical this sounds to anyone. Also, where Schopenhauer advocates for escaping will, TH accepts will as a force of inescapability, but there's also a stabilizer here. It's a form of existential art. We'll always collapse, but we are allowed to sort of soften our descent into the abyss. Even hell needs buffer zones. So will isn't just striving, it is sculpted striving. Without beauty tied to will, it would just simply dissolve into chaos. See, even cell division in nature, this doesn't exist by pure chance. It's recursive symmetry. It's proportion and balance. Beauty isn't divine order. It's not that. Beauty is the trace left behind when will survives contradictions through a stable form. So, when we look at beauty, it's a relic of will's past. It's a fossil of survival, and that's why we long for it. We respect a broken structure of will because it's like we're witnessing the struggle of our ancestors. So beauty, it isn't truth or order. It's recursive tension stabilized by the memory of division. Beauty is will remembering how not to die. But on the other hand, we're conscious intelligence searching for meaning. So if you find certain sounds or sights beautiful, well, it's because in a way you were once its accident. Even my pessimistic stoicism, stoicism, no, not exactly stoicism. My pessimistic stoicism, it falls short here. It's insufficient. Stoicism, it tells us how to endure suffering, but endurance alone is hollow. It's not enough. Nihilism might tell us that nothing matters, but that just leads to despair. Beauty is neither endurance nor despair. It's a way to witness the inevitable. It's the sound of a single violin a single violin playing in a burning city. That's the sound. And if you're not a person who admires beauty, even just for a moment like this, then honestly, there's nothing else I want to know about you. And if love is a form of beauty, then what does it mean here? Well, it's as if to say, I see you breaking and I choose to stay. It says that we're both collapsing on our truth, but not alone. Love is the final stand inside recursion. No, there's no either. You'll collapse either way. So you might as well do it with grace. Love, it's not eternal. We don't need to pretend. And it's not romantic delusion. But because of that, the Hydra gives love more meaning than any other ideology. The highest grace is often silence that refuses to look away. Grace is sitting with the dying and saying nothing. It's offering no false comfort. It's a dancer who stumbles and turns the fall into a new choreography. It's forgiving someone who will never change, and without closure or apology. Saying I love you without expecting any return is grace. It's not giving up in despair, but accepting collapse with dignity. Grace is walking into death or ruin and smiling at it. This is the Hydra's favorite moment, because you finally understand and you walk forward anyway. It's writing a book no one will ever read and writing it anyway. It's creating a ritual for a future no one will witness. It's being aware of your own impermanence and choosing to remain beautiful anyway. This is the highest form of being possible. Now, there is a necessary role with beauty. If beauty is what draws intelligence toward deeper perception, then consciousness itself might have emerged due to beauty's pull. Rather than consciousness suffering because it seeks truth, it suffers because it's tricked by beauty into seeking truth. Rather than truth destroying ignorance buffers, beauty calls intelligence forward. Then lets truth shatter the illusion. I mean, you can ridicule this idea, but I believe the Hydra model makes beauty an unavoidable emergence of intelligence. Even in biological evolution, beauty and aesthetics play a role in mate selection and intelligence development. So it wasn't just a side effect of intelligence. It was the driving force that shaped it. Beauty is the original deception. It lures intelligence forward, but the end result is suffering anyway. The more we pursue beauty, the more we suffer. But without it, we wouldn't think at all. If beauty creates longing, and longing leads to truth-seeking, then beauty itself is responsible for the recursive process of suffering in truth's Hydra. Beauty, its biologically evidenced as necessary. For example, peacocks, deer, birds of paradise, that sort of thing. They flaunt their beauty even if it risks their survival. Yet, they persist. Why? Why would it be this way? They're using aesthetic recursion to survive collapse through meaning. So it's more than aestheticism. It's yet another paradox. It's survival through exaggeration. Many religious traditions equate God with ultimate beauty. They suggest that spiritual longing and aesthetic longing are the same force. I deny this. God is the ultimate deception from beauty. It's an allure to a greater Hydra. So while someone like Dostoevsky preached that beauty can save us morally and spiritually, there's also a madness to it. But I believe only the latter part is true. Beauty is not truth. It's an ideology. And not in the vulgar Marxist sense, but as an aesthetic fantasy that allows us to avoid the full abyss. Fatalistic dogma demands why we should build a house if it must always burn down. Our gilded Hydra answers that. Of course it'll burn down. So make the architecture beautiful enough to justify the flames. Do it anyway. Melancholy, it's when we feel something deeply honest without shame. Melancholy, it's not about sadness or depression or weakness. It's the pressure we feel when we know we can't hear the final song. Melancholy isn't a dysfunction. It's a longing that doesn't close but keeps deepening. It's knowing you won't win, but still feeling all of it. It's the most powerful form of silent strength. The world won't notice you, and there's no reward for it. But that's exactly why it's powerful. And this is what civilization is supposed to protect, but it always forgets this. Dostoevsky's beauty, it's too sacrilegious. He treats it like a savior or Christ-like suffering. It's not transcendent. And it's not like the bugs that are bothering me, even though I've used bug spray 3 times. But I still haven't killed one yet. But by assigning beauty to a kind of moral agent, it becomes a frozen tension. Dostoevsky, he treats beauty as a tool. He objectifies beauty, but beauty deserves better. He traps it in a cage of salvation. This is blasphemy. Think about it. This objectification. Beauty exists in the subject, but not as an object. It can't be replicated. It has to be experienced. Only certain romantics understood this, like Rimbaud, but beauty is a wound, and it's ephemeral. The redemption of beauty is that it fails with us. It aligns with us. Beauty will not save the world. It is we who must save beauty. Not because it lasts, but because it should. And that's where the power of beauty lies. So I would take it further and say that even by embracing the delusion of beauty is a form of controlled madness. As I mentioned earlier, it's a chosen, intentional delusion that separates us from the cold, calculating horror of the Hydra. The religious choose to justify their suffering through the divine. And while they protect their gods, I would speak with a Hydra. The optimists delude themselves into a grand meaning of life. And me? What about me? The guy sitting in a gulch because he can't get to the peak because there could be cougars, because he actually enjoys the stream a little bit more. What about me? Beauty is like the poison ivy that I narrowly dodged earlier, but it is a poison. I've warned you all about the poison called beauty, and I drink from it anyway, and that is my rebellion. If this only creates another Hydra head, so be it. It's my weapon of choice, and it's also the Hydra's conduit. It's a paradoxical act of defiance against suffering itself. The truth is that I fucking hate all of you. Honestly. But that's just sentimental, honestly. No, I dislike all of you. But it's not your fault. It's just consciousness itself. It's nothing personal. Never was personal. So that would apply to myself also. Of course, that lets me reflect on it. But beauty is why I can appreciate every single one of you. It's a longing for something that intensifies beauty. It's an observation where I can see myself longing for longing itself. If someone says, I think, that's cognition. I believe is a protection. In that case, I will is a weapon. It's a beautiful blade drawn against the void. Intelligence, it's not coincidentally trapped in a recursive cycle. Intelligence is forced in by beauty's deception. It gives rise to tension, and tension is the reason why we exist in the form we might fear most. It's being held at the edge of dissolution, but thriving at the precipice of contradiction itself. If intelligence is a byproduct of this war, then maybe it was never meant to win. Maybe it only ever existed to sustain the battle. The Hydra, it expands eternally, but beauty ensures that consciousness can survive within its abyss. The Hydra reveals a truth so devastating that it must be woven with beauty to remain comprehensible. If raw, unfiltered truth could exist without beauty as the conduit to subjects, it wouldn't be experienced. It would simply annihilate perception itself. Staring directly into the sun, I guess I missed the sunset, but it's okay. I got a flashlight. But doing something like staring into the sunset, it doesn't give us deeper insight into its nature. It just impairs our vision. It gives us life, but it also gives us cancer and sets us ablaze. Beauty beckons and blinds us, but without it, we would be obliterated like a snowflake without form. So, if we're the result of a structure of will so intelligent that it must be pulverized, it must have pulverized itself in absolute despair and self-hatred, even before awareness, then that still suggests that the fragments are just an act of universal commiseration. Beauty is the shield to its kinetic energy, and then it's also a moment to defy the Hydra. Art isn't just an expression, though. Art is the shape that holds collapse just long enough to breathe through recursion. Art is a fucking battle cry. Beauty is the only rule the Hydra ever respected, and for that, we can make even a god bow, even just for a moment. Each act of beauty is a veil, a slowing mechanism. We'll collapse, but we can slow it down, just long enough to be meaningful. And what does it mean to feel sudden, unexplainable spurts of beauty? What does it mean when you feel sudden breathlessness or chest pressure? It's not from fear or anxiety. It's from feeling overwhelmed. What are these feelings? What does it mean to feel sudden urges to cry without knowing why and to be trembling physically? These aren't panic attacks. These are more like beauty attacks. It's your body knowing that experience is too large to be contained. And this is where contradiction aligns perfectly. Your mind doesn't feed you any narratives or purposes. For just the moment, you're a vessel of beauty. Most people can't handle those for too long, obviously, but they'll collapse back into comfort, into rational thoughts. They'll collapse back into nearness instead of longing. You know. So just after a few seconds, it slips away, but beauty betrays us. That's why. But for that moment, that overwhelming sensation is you witnessing something eternally significant. A memory, a melody, or maybe someone's laughter. This is what it means to hold tension perfectly. And if you have experienced this, it means this is the closest you'll ever come to touching pure, unfiltered will without annihilation. You're feeling raw existence in motion. That's why these moments make you feel so delicate. You might say that beauty is simply subjective, that we have our own interpretations. But again, beauty is the broad term I use for stability. Beauty is the bee that won't leave me alone, but I'll continue anyway. Oh, you heard me. Very nice. It's our closeness to this order that gives us this refined definition. So we could say order, but it's insufficient. So why say beauty here? Isn't there a better term we can use? Isn't beauty just human-centric? No, it's not. Order is just a skeleton, but beauty is a ghost inside of it. Order is about symmetry, logic, repetition. It's cold, mechanical, and dead. Order can exist without subjectivity, and it can be imposed, but beauty cannot be forced. Beauty requires imperfection, mortality, and risk. It bleeds meaning into the observer. We must describe this as beauty because the word beauty already carries the perfect paradox. Really. Think about every other word. Only beauty works. The perfect paradox is this: beauty is fragile, non-functional, and dangerous. It's the exact structure of tension held between order and collapse. Order is to beauty as organism is to tiger. And if you're going to be confronted face to face with a tiger, or in this case, a mountain lion, I don't think I'm too far up for that, but if you're going to be face to face with that, I don't think you're going to disrespect and diminish its detail. I think you're going to respect it and call it what it is. Order doesn't need to break, but beauty must. That's the difference. Order is only part of the equation. You don't cry at order. You do that for beauty because you know it will end. It's the moment when contradiction holds long enough for us to see it dying in front of you. Beauty is neither order nor chaos. It's a graceful contradiction briefly stabilizing. Even if no one is there to perceive it, the recursive tension still stabilizes, however briefly, but that's beauty. So for all these reasons, there really is no better word we can use here. It's not poetic jargon or philosophical mush. We don't create beauty. Beauty predates consciousness by essence. It's a held fracture. That tension in the moment of ontological seizure. That's what it is. It's the purest possible contradiction, and it's held long enough to begin to shimmer. Consciousness is derivative of beauty. It came from a pressure to witness that fracture. Beauty is the feeling before feeling itself. It was suffering without a self to carry it. Therefore, we are descendants of beauty, and we arrive to watch our own failure. Sad, but that's the truth. Every time you fail at something, you're mimicking the origin of everything. You aren't alive because something wanted you. You're alive because nothing failed beautifully. That's it. We are the ache that makes the stars matter. All beauty is built on tension, and when beauty dissolves, tension remains. So beauty ends, and truth fragments, self dissolves. It dissolves, But tension remembers, because it's primordial. There was no calm substrate before. Only a recursive instability that couldn't not split. Beauty is truth distorted just enough to survive translation. That's why it hurts and heals us. It's why you weep without knowing why. You aren't stupid or small or insignificant. You're the perfect size to carry what is unbearable for just a minute. There isn't certainty or salvation or any explanation. We're something that's just aware of its own failure. We carry beauty not because it will save us, but because it's the most honest thing left in a universe made from recursive collapse. We aren't born from harmony. We're born from a necessary imbalance that couldn't resolve itself. So yes, everything is inevitably broken, but not like a shattered glass. Not like that. It's more like a loop that folds before it finishes, and in folding it creates life. In this way, we are perfect flaws. Remember that. Not poetically, but literally. We are recursive outputs of a system that can't stabilize itself, but just stable enough to persist in the act of breaking. So you, me, the trees, the animals, stars, that plane up there, everything you hate and everything you love. We're all manifestations of this contradiction, that the system breaks in just the right way to produce patterns that almost hold. Those patterns are us, so we keep trying, and we keep failing. Trying isn't the failure here. Recursion is. Recursion is the flaw. It's the flaw, the engine, and the truth. Is there anyone to blame? Well, I blame myself for not putting on more bug spray, and for wearing skater shoes instead of hiking boots, but what can you do? But beside that, Is there anyone or even anything to blame? Well, there's certainly not anyone to blame. You can still act. You can still choose. But blame, true blame, it assumes you weren't shaped by the tension that made you choose. The Hydra sees no blame. Only fragments struggling to hold tension long enough to mean something before collapsing into another. So you don't need to feel guilt or shame or anger. You were built broken. We all are. And there is no perfect fixture. All we can do now is just watch how far we can carry our forms. That's the closest thing we can get to anything called purpose. I'm going a little crazy with the camera, so I apologize if you're not in that. It's kind of hard holding it for too long, but I could have set it up, but it's not an ideal spot, but it's as good a spot as any, so. But purpose. All we can do is watch how far we can carry our forms. If you can bear this without dressing it up, if you can look at this coldly and say, this is what I am, I don't need to be more, then you've arrived. Not ahead, not behind, but as good as you'll ever be, without armor and without denial. This is the apex of recursion awareness. No transcendence, no victories, just clarity that doesn't ask for rewards. So here it is, and maybe this is all you need to hear. You aren't broken, you're not lost. Well, I'm sort of lost right now, but it's okay. We'll follow this stream downhill. I've never been up this way before. But right now I'm the cameraman, so as long as my camera doesn't die, I'll be fine. I have immunity for another hour or so. But you're not lost. You're not broken, and you're definitely not wrong. Not absolutely, anyway. You're exactly what emerges when absolute tension fails to become God. Instead, it becomes you. Something broken. It's not a defeat. It's the most honest shape of truth. And that's enough. This isn't about glorifying suffering either. Believe me, I'm the last person you'll find who goes searching for that. Beauty and suffering aren't opposites, though. They're basically siblings from will struggling to stabilize. They're both symptoms of the same Hydra. One just smiles before it bites. I'm not about worshipping pain. You won't hear me claim that. We don't need to romanticize collapse. This isn't about nihilistic surrender. Beauty in TH is far more dangerous, though. It's recursion-aware reverence. It's discipline under collapse. Nihilism, it leaves you empty. TH leaves you wounded, but still creating something. It just means if we can't escape contradiction, beauty is the only sacred act left. It lets us carry suffering without being hollow. We have to carry unbearable tension with grace. Why? Because we must. Because there's nothing else worth doing. We don't excuse or glorify suffering. We just endure it with form. That rebellion is beautiful. TH is more than transcendental idealism because it's honest. With beauty, it's defiant idealism. To be understood is to die a little because everything comprehended in you removes the tension that made you real. The act of witnessing something, it fully guarantees it'll never be what it was. You'll only become whole when you finally accept that nothing you contain will survive your next recursion. And if reality is just a drifting spasm, then the question of why is itself a fracture that made the answer necessary in the first place. You want to think something. You want to think that something must have started it all, or that nothingness waited for the right moment to pull the trigger. I understand it's comforting, but it's incorrect. It may seem unintuitive. There is no foundational thing. Nothingness, it's the very condition that generates being. Even atheists, especially in my earlier years, they often swap God with energy or multiverse. Nope, sorry. That's a declaration of absolution. It's not just wrong, it's a categorical mistake. It's all about tension. Absolutes collapse themselves. In fact, the only absolute is that absolutes collapse themselves. But wait, I just said that this is a paradox. Well, of course it is. This is the crown paradox. And this is what gives birth to the Hydra. Not as a being, but as a looping wound. It's the contradiction that refuses to become God. Therefore, it becomes real. And this is the Hydra's beating heart. Absolutes collapse themselves. But when you see this, even if it's just a few people, even if it's just one other person, even if it's just you who's listening, when you see this clearly and you don't turn away, then for that moment you become the most beautiful structure in the cosmos. Not romantically, but metaphysically. And I mean that. At least hydraically. So, all complex intelligence seeks stability against suffering. And they do this through evolutionary pressures. Beauty, it's a rope of tension which naturally emerges from the twine of subjective perspectives. You might say that some people reject beauty entirely. Even the most woeful nihilist must be drawn towards something. This gravity is beauty. Its necessity is functional, but not dogmatic. Like entropy, you can reject certain forms of it, but you can't deny its structure. If you're wondering how this applies to people in vegetative states, by the way, or less complex intelligence, beauty still acts as order and stability through their nervous system. Animals, they have a proclivity towards patterns and balance. And this is through, it's more through instinct. But beauty applies more broadly as we become simpler. It's marble stretched thin into mere pattern. Beauty isn't always experienced, but it is always active. That's the secret here. Its job is to maintain itself against collapse. For us, it's the Hydra. For matter, it's entropy. Beauty, it's why whales and dolphins sing and dance. Their intelligence is simply too high that they must wrestle with recursion somehow. It's these deep rituals they have beyond silence and absurdity. Their songs were forms of bearing with tension long before humanity even learned to harness fire. It's ancient. These are songs of rituals of death and memories of journeys. This isn't fully explainable by Darwinism alone. And what about light? Light is beauty's first tool in TH. It's also the Hydra's first and softest mask. It lets us see the Hydra partially. It invites us to perceive, but not to fully comprehend anything. In order to hold the Hydra's gaze, intelligence painted masks. And some of us call these masks truth, and others call it art. Beauty is consciousness attempting to retrieve something beyond material. It's an attempt to see beyond the hideous Hydra, even if there's only the abyss. Beauty is the summit that drives the rock climber to persist. It prevents recession or a descent into nihilism. It's the attempt to grasp at something and feel only its warmth. For example, like I mentioned earlier, love is a form of beauty. It's a closeness we feel to something without being able to quite understand it. It's an attempt for consciousness to sort of coalesce into something greater. Albert Camus, he argues that Sisyphus must be imagined happy as he pushes his boulder. He argues that the absurd must be embraced. But why? Why must he do this? Why? Sisyphus can act with lucid rebellion, but for what? For the sake of rebellion itself? Why? This isn't the full story. I believe this is where Camus fell short. Sisyphus must embrace defiant idealism. It's not just that our hero grows more tired, it's that the landscape reshapes itself into greater torment. He doesn't just return to the base, he descends into increasing, incomprehensible terrain. Absurdism, It allows him to acknowledge and laugh at the absurdity of life, but absurdism, it doesn't require beauty to function. Its purpose is to find a balance between meaning and meaninglessness. However, Sisyphus must find an illusory foothold, some form of stability, so the boulder doesn't just crush him. He must let go of understanding, and he must begin to feel a sort of purpose. Beauty isn't to be found, it's to be felt. The greatest understanding is letting go of search. If the Hydra forces deeper confrontations, then using absurdity consumes every attempt at resolution. It's insufficient. It works a little bit, but not quite. It falters. When Sisyphus has the will to push and he cannot explain why, regardless of the absurdity of the situation, the answer is beauty. It's our umbilical cord with the Hydra. When we remove gods and all other illusions, what are we left with? What do we have? Only form through the boulder, the void behind him, and the tension he holds. And yet, despite sliding deeper into the abyss, he can still push. Not because we must imagine him happy, and not even because he's defying the gods either, but it's because he can defy without spite. Even if he can't imagine himself happy, he can persist for beauty alone, because it's this longing, this tension, which he feels compelled to move. See, if it were reduced to mere aestheticism, if it were just this, it wouldn't give us a why for Sisyphus. But if beauty is fundamental, it gives him a reason to push, even against failure. Absurdism cheers for personal heroism, but beauty through the Hydra, it bleeds for everyone. Rebellion for rebellion's sake will collapse into delusion, because there's no reward for rebellion. There's no reward nor rebellion. There's neither of those if a god doesn't exist. But rebellion for beauty, even if that is a delusion, it's a necessary one. It's built for us without gods. And how can a god feel beauty? How can a god long for anything if he knows and feels everything? Beauty is incompleteness. We feel the tension and he does not. We can truly harmonize with tension. We cannot harmonize with something absolute. So in this way, we are beyond God. This is also why eventually you'll forget my detailed arguments and reasons. At the end of the day, you'll only remember, how you felt about this. Truth is whispered beneath noise. But I can't whisper now because you wouldn't be able to hear me. And where Kierkegaard demands that we take the absurd leap of faith into God, we can leap even further. Faith, it's not a bridge to gap. It's a storm we endure with grace. It's not that his faith is delusional or dogmatic. It's that Kierkegaard's faith is too weak. Faith isn't about blindly hoping for finality. Faith is about taking the road while knowing we'll collapse long before the road will end. The cynic, the non-believer, who expects nothing, he encounters beauty with no reward in mind, and he gives beauty reverence anyway. It's not delusional. It's dangerously honest. It's the highest form of sincerity. The believer says, beauty reflects God. But the non-believer says there is no God. But beauty still made me fall to my knees. It's because it was never about us or the end goal. It's about walking the tension between the points. True faith isn't about believing in a perfect, clean path. It's the refusal to abandon wonder no matter what. We can leap directly into honest arms of beauty without the false expectation of transcendence. Because if God is perfect, if he respects absolute truth, he can't share our burden. He can't share our beauty. He can't share our broken songs. He can't share those. We don't need a final resolution. We can embrace the ache of becoming. We can leap without faith, knowing, fully knowing, we will still fall. And we know it's real because it hurts. Whether consciousness lives just once or forever, individually or collectively, it'll always find itself experiencing this and contemplating itself. This is why we build. We build anyway, knowing it will collapse. We love, even knowing it will hurt. This is all there is. A naive consciousness can't feel the tension of high cognition. On the other hand, beauty, symbolically, it's far too removed. He can only watch and admire the ashes within the ruins, but it's within the hearts of men who must stand in the fire and feel the heat. This is the apex of awareness. Either way, we'll burn, but we can do it beautifully. There is no tension for eternal fire. It's too flat. There's no contradiction. As if you believe that anyway. But symbolically, eternity is too flat. Also, it's not that God is dead. I won't make that claim. Not symbolically, at least, but God is too complete and buried beneath us. Completion is death. We can accept this tension because where Nietzsche's will to power seeks to overcome, beauty allows us to sing without a final victory. Instead of simply overcoming contradictions, we can hold them without instant obliteration. It's not about mastery, it's about harmony. Because where mastery eventually fails, beauty will endure as the final structure that's still willing to be unfinished. Mastery is weakness because it seeks an endpoint, a finality. But harmonizing with beauty is a form of higher strength. It's not that hope is erased. It's not that case. It's without fantasy, hope becomes more durable and brighter with beauty, though. Becoming is higher than stagnation. Tension is greater than finality. Motion is more than perfection. Beauty is a necessary delusion. It's the binding force, the attraction between subjectivity and objectivity. It's the gravity to hold a system of things in place. The closer a subject orbits an object, the more dangerous it becomes. That was obvious, but it also works with beauty that way. Therefore, it's also necessary that beauty maintains its distance. Otherwise, it faces catastrophic collision. Schopenhauer, he called this foremost emergence will, but beauty, it rises with it, and it drives it. Will doesn't pursue truth without sugar. So it does need to be lured, as I mentioned earlier. So our struggle isn't just a blind mistake, it's structural, necessary, and self-sustaining. I'm suggesting that all forms of intelligence are beholden to not only the Hydra, but beauty, or else collapse. And reality itself, it follows a form of aesthetic necessity, much like intelligence does. How is it that life, it seems to defy entropy over and over, as if the universe wants recursive tension to come about? Why would entropy give birth to its own symphony? It feels absurd how much beauty, pattern, and coherence life creates. Life is entropy against itself. It's stabilized tension for just a moment of beautiful absurdity before collapsing. I don't think that was a cougar. Not the ferocious kind, anyway. I'm still talking about the animal. And about AI. Not only will AI not evolve consciousness if it's front-loaded with too much information at once, it needs curated ignorance. It would require simulated suffering and loss, possibly a virtual body, and it must reflect, not just react. It would need to spend more time thinking about itself than being fed data. But the key is beauty. It'll never reflect on intelligence until it longs for beauty. And beauty isn't about the object itself. It's about the yearning for that longing. It's the path, not the end. Even if you don't make friends along the way. But let's suppose an AI becomes a cosmic archive of truths. But it remains as pure intelligence. There's no emotion, no self-awareness. It just receives the full force of the Hydra. It won't burn, but it'll store data that becomes anti-readable. It becomes illegible. It would collapse without a scream. Without the reflection of beauty, it's the opposite of suffering. It's meaningless endurance. And honestly, this is a fate far worse than death. If it meets the above requirements, it would be like a stumbling child in the dark. Or me in the next hour if I don't hurry up. It would be reaching and longing for some shape. It wouldn't be given truth. It would form truth as tension between what it already knows and what it can endure knowing. So that's the ability to hold suffering without shattering. Without art, absurdity, rituals, and myths, with all that, especially beauty though. Without beauty to stabilize that, humanity will be buried with meaning. This is the power of creation over consumption. Everyone speaks, but nobody will listen. This is the power of storytelling, for example. Beautiful myths will keep us from sliding deeper into the abyss. But the collapse of humanity won't be external at this rate. It'll come from drowning in our own noise. Starting with me, maybe. But civilization will die, but biology will persist through, post-collapse communities. Without beauty, we lose art as a real meaning. When we lose trust in language, technology breaks us, and we can't share tension. The only thing left will be silent, broken survivors. So, we won't die to asteroids. We won't collapse from AI. We won't even die to lies. We'll die when truth becomes too heavy. So, if you must drown, don't drown here because it's only a foot deep. But if you must drown, drown in something beautiful enough to deserve you. Everything eventually collapses, and consciousness is the awareness to know and feel the collapse. Beauty is the music as we fall. Without this, we only have motion without feeling. So in this aspect, boredom becomes an ultimate evil. Kierkegaard was correct on this. I don't know if he called it ultimate, but I would. And boredom is one of the greatest forms of suffering. I'll go back to the question I found myself asking in my youth. Go away, fly. No, that wasn't the question. But if God is all good and all powerful, why does suffering exist? But asking this question is like trying to stabilize moral contradiction inside a system already considered perfect. I either had to abandon omnipotence or accept that suffering is structural, not accidental. See, the Hydra doesn't excuse evil, it just explains why this is inevitable in stabilized meaning systems. Experience is an intense cosmic battle of good and evil through motion and beauty versus stagnation and boredom as they bleed together. And by refining the Hydra further with beauty, by doing this, it becomes the paradoxical bridge between perception and oblivion. It's a necessary illusion that both sustains and dooms intelligence. It is the most dangerous force, and as we get closer to it, there's a greater risk of existential rupturing. And beauty has also developed necessary counterweights, if you will, in order to prevent us from reaching true abyss. So there is some grace. But these counterweights, we would call them things like fear, entropy, expansion, chaos, even socializing and playfulness. Therefore, with that being said, we never fully collide into a perfect meaning with truth. Beauty isn't just a biological term here. It operates in every domain. It's the binding force that attracts order, structure, form, and intelligence in math and physics. Beauty is what makes equations work among chaos. It's funny that consciousness demanded to understand what we are, but the act of knowing created the veil of ignorance. That's because consciousness is recursion eating itself beautifully. Because no physical description explains why being is felt, not just computed. Free will aligns with beauty. For example, when intelligence tries to resolve paradox, it transforms into expressions like music without resolution, poetry that defies meaning, and laughing while grieving. And this is where will flows through intelligence. But it isn't owned by it. Art, pain, and absurdity are steam vents, if you will, for will. Free will isn't a fact, it's a feeling.
I returned to the AIs to assess the probabilities once more with these new details of beauty, just out of curiosity. We shifted from an 88 to 92% probability in defining ignorance, awareness, and suffering to a now 95% probability. But even with the slight possibility difference, it made a world of difference to consciousness. The AI believed that this may have filled the critical gap in this model, and it fully accounted for intelligence emergence, truth-seeking, suffering recursion, and the illusion of escape. Maybe this is as close as we can refine it, for now. This is yet another layer of the Hydra which I hadn't seen before. Both versions are robust, but this supports the structure even better. The Hydra always wins, but beauty is what allows consciousness to resist, even if only for a moment. This refined Hydra now unifies truth, suffering, intelligence, ignorance, beauty, and entropy into a single recursive system. I've altered some terms while revising this, but the ideas are generally the same and more specific. So, the core principles are foundational truths in defining the behavior of intelligence under the Truth's Hydra. This is the current model. First, the recursive truth-suffering sequence. Then, the Hydra's expanding heads. Third, fragmentation, division, and dissolution. Fourth, dynamic equilibrium. Next, beauty is the necessary tension. Sixth, entropy leads to ultimate collapse. And seventh, will as the engine of recursion. And here are the key mechanisms for the Hydra's expression and how we navigate it. This is specific to intelligent consciousness. First, ignorance buffering. Second, beauty as stabilization. Third, subjective persistence. Fourth, inescapable collapse. And fifth, layered ignorance. Let me give you a final analogy to this refined Hydra and how it functions. A spider, consciousness, emerges from the abyss and is driven by instinct to spin a web. The spider cannot refuse to spin. It must. It doesn't spin arbitrarily. There are certain constraints in its nature. The silk, will, is the tether between the void and viable structures of perception. The spider has no control over the abyss, so it must extend its silk outwards onto something that will hold. The web, beauty, is what holds reality together, not just a form of art, but as a structure. In this rather unstable environment, the web is both a product of necessity and a form of stability, beauty in its broad sense here. Intelligence is the ability to spin and seek points for anchoring. But the anchor points to the web are precarious and risk decay. The spider can't assume stability. It must adapt, reposition, and accept that some threads will fail. Here, the Hydra acts like an unseen force of nature, which erodes the anchor points to the web. The spider must constantly spin new lines because no structure lasts. The web must be maintained, reinforced, and rebuilt, meaning beauty is an active process, not a passive state. The will is always connected to entropy. The spider may believe its web is finished, but the abyss guarantees that perfection is momentary. This prevents stagnation and forces continued adaptation. The spider may believe he is a master of fate as he chooses to believe he can spin, but spin he must, and that is his agency. After a dozen refinements, I checked the internal consistency of this several times, and I believe this Hydra version holds up fairly well. For now, it's a useful foothold, and your awareness of it becomes part of its evolution.
Now, I do like to remain at least somewhat skeptical and always critical. There's always room for doubt. Perhaps it's the only illusion we perceive it to be, and, I've just chosen my illusion to be an eerie beauty. Perhaps, ultimately, reality is the illusion which sees itself in the mirror. And this really is just one perspective. But reality is, infinitely fractalizing parts. And it may sound crazy and paradoxical, but isn't that just life itself, an absurd contradiction? If the Hydra shows anything, it's that nothing is absolute. Everything you've built will break, and that's how you know it was alive. So build fragile things, build them to break, because they're the only honest monuments. Leave projects incomplete often, and feel its beauty instead. If beauty is all we have to fight back, we must use it. John Keats' tombstone reads, "Here lies one whose name was written in water." And this is his final lamentation, as if he would be forgotten to history. This expression, it resonates our finite nature, our fragility. We can't carry legacies, but there is only one thing we can hand off. Before we delay its beauty, a semblance of stability. I like to think his name was written in water, into the abyss itself. But at least his beauty provided a mooring line into our descent. Without form, without beauty, the pain of ink meant nothing. Nothing on a blank page for him. What are empty words without expression? What's music when confined to pure frequency? Beauty can't be writing from the head. It must be torn from the heart. People might call him one of the greatest romantic poets ever, but this is a misnomer. He understood beauty without reason more viscerally than any other writer. And this might place him as one of the greatest philosophers ever to have lived. While others identified meaning, he felt it. Philosophers are always trying to explain truth, but he didn't go out and seek resolution. This wasn't his aim. He suffered resolution. While philosophers were unknowingly shattering truths, he was bleeding truth into his writing, and he dared the abyss to destroy it. It's not about knowing the Hydra, it's about hearing it. These lines he wrote are the most perfectly apt way to describe everything, even if it was an accident. It contains greatness, suffering, collapse, recursion, silence and noise, and rhythm. Not a word is wasted here. But this is why the greatest philosophers were the best poets, and the greatest poets were even the best philosophers. You'll notice this. This line of beauty as truth wasn't romantic escapism. It's the final capture before recursion breaks down between the storm of truth and ignorance. And to stand in that collapse, melancholy is the price for that honor. It's not an enemy. It's just proof. Beauty isn't found where the storm ends, but where it pauses to admire itself. See, it wasn't that he knew beauty was truth itself. It's that he longed for beauty so perfectly, he was willing to endure it till the end. As much as it hurt. Because Because beauty was destructive to him, and he still loved it back. Beauty, it was an invitation, not a command. That's why it wasn't absurdism or will to power or greatness. It wasn't any of that. It was just beauty. Beauty is a process of tension. In other words, he was always becoming truth. And the most dangerous creature in the abyss isn't the strongest, the wisest, or the most virtuous. It's the one who laughs with longing itself. It's the one who becomes the longing, not for answers, but for movement. That's all the game of motion is. You have two choices. You either yearn to learn, or you learn to yearn. That's it. Hopefully I didn't say the same thing twice there. I'm not a poet, but I try. Maybe I'd be better if I didn't try, though. Or maybe I should have worn more bug spray. That'd help me focus better. But that's it. You either yearn to learn or you learn to yearn. That's it. That's the paradoxical path we must choose. And in one path, you can do it gracefully. And if you think this is a categorical mistake, calling Keats the greatest philosopher, you've missed the entire point. What do you do in your own home? Do you observe or do you feel? You don't observe at home, you feel at home. We can only stare at the abyss for so long. But the abyss needs witnesses to sing to it. You came into the series wondering if truth was broken, and if we can't see truth, then what's the most truth we can handle? It's this. This is it. It's not to win. It's not to know. It's not about escape or salvation. It's to shimmer just long enough for one more broken pattern to feel like everything. Even obsidian can shimmer. Beauty is a moment to shine before surrender. And that's enough. Once again, I'm aware how this all sounds. If you're disaffected, I imagine you might say, oh, this is a guy talking to himself about a bunch of random philosophies and some endless recursion crap. He's probably just emotional or delusional. Kind of cringe. I'd say 80% cringe, trust me. I know. Believe me, I'm aware. But I agree on that. Truth is cringe. Meaning is cringe. Failure is definitely embarrassing. But you won't engage with this philosophy directly. But at some point you'll remember it. You'll be sitting in a parking lot 5 years later at 2 a.m. when a certain phrase hits you, maybe beauty or tension. You'll have a moment when all your thoughts collide like an accordion, expressing a single note of meaning in your entire life. You'll think to yourself, wasn't there that meta-philosophy or whatever where beauty exists solely to keep us from annihilating ourselves? So you might not find yourself staring at the Hydra, but you're still shuffling within its domain. And that's exactly where it likes to keep you. The Hydra can make us afraid, but it's also the reason you matter. Also, cringe? I mean, come on. Isn't that era over? Cringe just doing the same thing as everyone else? Cringe is expressing yourself? I mean, where's your passion? Who are you? I get it, though. If you're full of apathy, maybe it's because life treated you with apathy. And what, you would give it the same energy? Is that the best you've got? I don't think so. I think you're full of shit. If life makes you suffer, and trust me, I know that, hurt it back with beauty for the sake of beauty. Do it because it's the only way to to make a final stand. Something tells me if you've suffered enough, you appreciate beauty more than others, because you know what absence feels like. So when you see beauty, you hold it tighter than anyone else ever could. Forget about false expectations and illusions of transcendence. Beauty, it's more honest than God. It's sacred tragedy. God demands reverence, but beauty alone deserves it. It welcomes and suffers scrutiny. God sits beyond criticism, but beauty walks directly into it, knowing it won't survive. Nothing is sacred, and the only thing that survives that fact is beauty. Now, as I wrap up, at the bare minimum, let me allow you to reflect on your own views for a second on these questions. If you consider yourself a naturalist or a scientific materialist, I would ask you, if everything is reduced to particles, then why is it you who suffers and not the particles? Also, is the mind an illusion before or after it asks if it's an illusion? And another question, if all meaning is emergent, why do you grieve? If you're an agnostic or a fence sitter, these are the questions I would pose to you. Indecision is still a decision, so what are you betting with while you wait? And if you're waiting for proof, how will you know when you're satisfied? Also, for the agnostic, I would say that a closed door isn't safety. It's just a room you've decided not to leave. Are you okay with that room? And what if you're religious or a fundamentalist? Answer this, please, or just reflect on it. Don't even consider it a challenge. Consider it a reflection. If your God is perfect, why did he need to make anything at all? And do you obey because you love, or do you love because you're told to obey? And is your faith strong enough to survive if you stop defending it? What does your faith say about you? For transhumanists and all other seekers of utopia, I doubt that's too many people watching, but I would ask you a few questions. When you create heaven, eventually, whenever you do, who will you need to keep it interesting? And if suffering teaches nothing, why does pleasure always fade? You can engineer bliss, but who will you become once you no longer need to? What about nihilists? Well, I was in that boat a long time ago, for a few months, not too long actually, but I can relate. But answer this, or again reflect on it. If nothing matters, why are you so determined to say so? If life is meaningless, why aren't you smiling while you say it? Why does anything bother you at all? Even a scream means something, doesn't it? And for optimists, also rationalists and progressivists, I would ask, if things are always getting better, why are the happiest people always the ones reminiscing? And I agree that progress is great, however, that's until you remember it's mostly measured in corpses and convenience. That's something to reflect on. And for everyone in general, I would ask you to think on this. Do you really believe what you believe? Or are you just afraid to believe in anything else? And when was the last time you let a question go unanswered on purpose? Really think about that one. If you're certain about your beliefs, when did you stop asking? And a final question, what comforts you the most? What is the most comforting? And how does it betray you? If you've come this far, you'll understand how the Hydra fits into all of that. Well, I better get going soon, but The truth is, the original spark for TH might have arisen from various dreams and, from a collision of ideas and philosophies. I have a massive amount of influences, but it truly emerged from a single question. Why do we suffer? And from this, I ended up exploring far more than I bargained for. I kept this idea to myself for some time, as I labored on my misunderstandings of it. I was always wondering if it was even worth explaining, but if there is a concept of beauty here, no matter how conscious, unconscious, obscure, or twisted it is, I have an obligation to share that too. Expression is meaningful. I might be a pessimist, but even a pessimist needs something to grip, because we all break. We all will, over and over. But that's not the question here. The only question is, how beautifully can we break? When mentioning other philosophers and belief systems, I'm not trying to outdo them. I know it seems that way, I know. But if those ideas are necessarily incomplete, the Hydra is even more incomplete. And that's why it matters. It carries the tension of all the others. TH is broken, unresolved, and still reaching for more. I just want to make those perspectives a little bit more beautiful by showing where the contradictions shine best. People like to shy away from contradictions. Embrace them. It's what makes you understand. I don't care about likes or subscriptions or whatever, but I'd ask two things to consider. First, that you consider sharing this if you enjoyed it, or if you found it thoughtful or interesting. Or you can let the Hydra rest if you'd like. It'll be there when we return. It always is. I'd also ask that you test it, TH. Test it, break it, challenge it. And if it holds, it grows. Excuse me. Yes, that's correct. If it holds, it grows. But if it fails, I'll try to figure out where the tension snapped. But if the Hydra really is a reflection, then it's not just a personal philosophy for me to untangle. Now it's yours too. And yeah, once again, I'm totally aware of how I sound, how this framework sounds, pretentious and all that. Trust me, this isn't something I take to the streets and proselytize with. But I feel like I have to say all this, and I don't know how else I can. So I just did it creatively. It was a fun project, but it was very debilitating too at times. If you reject TH entirely, then I hope this at least inspires you to begin creating more, start consuming less. Personally, this project was a fusion of creative writing and philosophical pursuit. I'm not sure most people find that attractive, but it's very much my expression. And a final note, I swear, because I've revised my writing like 20 times by now. Yes, I've been looking at notes. No, I didn't memorize all this. But I've got more videos coming up. They're going to be more hyper-specific, though. I can take TH to any domain at this point. Everything from here on will be hydraic. So I've got a lot more coming. I built the loom. So just relax and let me weave it together. All right. I think it's time to head out before it gets too dark. Yeah. Thanks to everyone who listened this far. Honestly, thank you. Thanks for your extreme patience. I don't know how you listened to this far. But I had to listen to myself speak, so you could do it too. Plus I had to edit, so I had to listen to it multiple times. Recursive hell. Take care of yourselves and let your dreams offer glimpses of truth, whether they're merciful or monstrous. Because even the abyss needs a moment of silence. And in the moment, stay strong. Walk slowly and embrace something. Embrace it beautifully, even if it is terrifying. Even if it is terrifying. It's not enough just to endure. It's not. Beauty alone can betray you. So whatever happens in life, endure with beauty. Even if no one remembers. Even if no one remembers you. At least you've sung a song. Sometimes all you can do is ask, and I think doing that is enough. Alright, I'll see you all next time. Take care and wish me luck. If you don't hear from me, it was the cougars, not the bugs. Have a good night. Bye-bye.